A recently issued United Nations report is a stark reminder of the unrest seen around the world. The Human Development Report looks at global progress, and its authors point to shifts in education, climate change, and tech, which are creating a, quote, new great divergence.
Argentina, Hong Kong, Barcelona, Venezuela, cities and countries around the world, there seems to be an implosion fueled by working class fighting against inequalities. In a recent tweet, Michael Brooks, host of The Michael Brooks Show, he pointed out there's a growing sense that societies are rigged to the favor of the powerful and trap the masses in a low-wage, dead-end life. So here to expand on that is Michael himself. Welcome back to the show, Michael. It's great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be here, guys. Always a pleasure.
Mike, you've done a great job of tracking kind of international unrest. What do you think the underlying common denominator here is? Because we see it's continent, cross-continent, cross-racial, cross-ethnic, cross-religious, everything. It really does seem to be a global indictment of our economic system. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you're totally right. So setting aside all of the obvious differences between, say, Iran, Hong Kong, Haiti, or Argentina or France, the big commonality is neoliberalism. It's how we're doing capitalism. It's extreme inequality. We're going to have a reform on the economic system that is always going to weigh on the backs of the poor, on the middle class. And it's really a relationship of parasitic governments and global capital exploiting populations. And there is a global uprising against that. I think in Latin America, in some ways, the resistance is the most clear, because I think that the language, whether you're looking at Colombia or Chile or whatever, Chile is saying neoliberalism was born here, it's going to die here. They're really centering it. Same with Haiti. But every single place you look at, including a place like Hong Kong, which I'm glad you mentioned, actually does have a very big labor component.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, and I think part of, like you said, in Latin America, part of the understanding is that this massive inequality is a feature and not a bug. So you can't just sort of like have some reform around the edges. You need a wholesale change. And that's why you see, that's why part of why we have Trump here. It's part of why we have the teachers movement here. It's part of why looking at Trump as like an aberration that we can just get rid of and get back to normal is so incredibly foolhardy.
Without a doubt. I'm going to use a disgusting analogy from one of my friends and mentors, Bill Fletcher Jr., but he said that right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. and I think, that's a great analogy for Donald Trump in terms of all of the features of that. But I think, and I apologize for the metaphor, but I think it fits perfectly. I think, though, Crystal, you're exactly right. And that's when we get back to this argument that we keep seeing again and again and again, particularly between the center and the left, right? Which is, how do you actually deal with beating these leaders and ensuring a humane and democratic future? And one group of people says you need to take the trends and the problems seriously. That's people on the left. And then people on the so-called center are just telling themselves bedtime stories about returning to normal. And even if we beat Trump and say you have 4 years of Joe Biden, all of the conditions are in place for these problems and these splits to continue. So you've only at best put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah.
Well, no offense taken to that herpes metaphor, but I think generally, I'm trying to think about how it has become so international and why it hasn't really received the coverage it deserves. This is one of the most important global trends that we've seen in a long time. And the last time I saw the media miss a story this big, it was right before Brexit. It was the refugee crisis in Europe. And I was looking at that and I said, this is going to rewrite the whole map of European politics. And it's exactly what happened. They only woke up whenever Brexit happened. What do you think is going to be the catalyst, so to speak, for the media to kind of wake up to a lot of these global uprisings?
Honestly, because they're so parochial, particularly here, it is going to be something like Bernie Sanders getting the nomination.
Yeah.
They don't look at, even in France, there are millions of people on the street about an anti-labor package. They don't take the hemisphere seriously, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the Middle East, they try to fit it and graft it onto other types of issues, some of which are legitimate. But I just read an interview with a former Egyptian foreign minister, and he said the most encouraging thing coming out of this is that we're actually seeing a recession of sectarian politics. in a lot of these situations. I mean, these are Shia, Sunni, secular, coming together saying, we're done. We're done with crony capitalism and global, and global inequity. So, but I think in the United States, I think one, they're totally not primed to understand the issues of capitalism, right? They dismiss and demean the left, and they don't have any strategic understanding of the right. Like, as an example, I think we're going to have to do a much better job of understanding what Boris Johnson did effectively on the left. I loathe the dude, but he's not just another Trump. He found another formula, including, actually, I would say, exploiting racism and xenophobia, but finding ways of actually ameliorating it and turning it into a new populist-oriented center-right politics. That's a whole other argument we're going to need to have. And so what's incredible, I'll just stay on Britain for a second. If you look at American press coverage of Britain, they go, Labour was destroyed, and that's Bernie, even though there's big differences between Corbyn and Bernie in terms of their personal popularity and polling. Ignore that the center got destroyed. Like, at least the Labour Party still exists as a party, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to the Tories, and it's either just kind of like, oh, well, this is just silly Britain stuff, or it's just a replay of Trump, versus what did this guy actually do? What did Dominique Cummings, his strategist, actually do? It was very effective objectively.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. We covered it a lot here.
From a left perspective, I mean, where do you see leftist movements around the globe that are finding success?
Well, there was good election results from my perspective in Argentina, in Mexico. Look, AMLO has between a 60 and 70% approval rating, and he is raising wages, and he is delivering labor reform, and he's popular. A new poll puts Lula in the upper 60s, and in France, the left is starting to kind of reform itself and bring itself together. And there's positive signals in the United States. I mean, the bottom line is that the Bernie Sanders campaign is an incredibly positive force. And you do see, I would say, at the heart of the agenda that Ilhan Omar's housing package is brilliant. And I do think that there's some people getting much more serious about conversations like the teacher strike, Crystal, that you talked about, or the strikes in Kentucky. I mean, it's there. I think the media coverage on it is always going to be a massive lag time, because they're always caught in between. They have no understanding of economic leftism, and they have a contempt for it. And then when it comes to right-wing populism, they actually either are overhyping it, or in some cases romanticizing it, or trying to diagnose it without understanding any of the underlying conditions.
Yeah,
I think that's right, Michael.
That's exactly right.
Thank you
Michael,
so much for joining us, man.
Thank you so much. Always great to see you.
Always a great pleasure, guys.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.